What's up, guys? Today we're working on this massive full sleeve cover up. He came in and wanted some dark bioorganic. It started out as a kind of nature themed sleeve. There was an alligator up here, a shark in the middle, and kind of a beach scene down at the bottom, and a skull. So what we did to kind of cover what was underneath is create some new textures, this kind of like scaly, you know, kind of underbelly, lower jaw type texture, the teeth, the saliva, the textured tongue. Now this upper jaw we're going to be working on today with the eyes and the teeth. We are going to incorporate a little bit of color in certain areas, but this is going to be mostly dark grays, blacks, things like that. We used all this like toothy texture and this bony kind of texture to cover what was the great white shark head that was right there. And down here we kind of like bring the kind of teeth and scales and all that stuff down here too. There's still a lot more work left to do. All right, so let me go over the color palette with you for today. We still have our blacks and our wash with a little bit of white in it just to kind of like lighten it up and give it like a little creamy texture. And then we have our opaque grays here, a dark, a medium, and a light. And then up here we have kind of some muted kind of pinks and purples and stuff that we're going to be using to create kind of like that gum texture around the teeth, and to give some of this like, you know, scaly texture a little bit more, you know, color, a little bit more definition. So right now I'm laying down the shading on the upper part, the upper jaw of this creature here. So I'm just getting like, you know, my dark areas laid in, you know, my midtones back here, just the basic shapes, not worried too much about going into detail yet. I'm just kind of like laying the base coat so that I can come in and then start to pick out all the little scaly textures. But right now I'm just trying to figure out where my lighting is coming from and how it's falling along the side of this creature. All right, so right here I'm just taking the outer edge of my curved mag here and just brushing this little area kind of above the gum line, like I guess the area between the gum and the rest of the mouth or the head. So I'm just kind of laying in this kind of dark to medium gray tone just to kind of create that little ridge of the upper jaw. And I'm going into like some of these areas where I want there to be a shadow. So like the light is coming from this side, so everything on the opposite of that side will be dark or in shadow. And we're just kind of building up these little shapes here just to get those curves, your little shadowy textures under those kind of brow ridges, giving it that cool kind of alien reptile look. I'm just gonna brush in some lighter tones here. Slowly build up this area, making sure to leave enough light areas for the eventual highlights, the light source. I've laid in my base colors, the basic shape of all the little bumps and ridges. And now I'm going in and adding some detail, adding some scaly, bumpy, kind of reptilian texture, little skin texture. You know, so I'm just going through and kind of randomly making these little geometric shapes in here and then picking the side. I'm using a 7-round shader, and I'm just kind of creating these little shapes where I want them. And then I go in and kind of back shade them, create a little bit of texture, a little bit of depth, make it look more scaly. You don't want the same kind of shape or definition throughout the whole area. You want it kind of random and varied so it looks more natural. If it starts looking too much like a repeated pattern, it's gonna look weird, not as natural there. So just kind of creating these little textures. You want some big ones, some small ones, you know, some a little bit more round. Here we're coming around this kind of eyeball. All right, so what I'm doing here is going in and layering in some more dark tones to kind of create these little ridges here. Just adding a little bit more of a richer tone right above that gum line, making it a little bit darker, pushing the light area out a little further. And then just kind of creating this kind of transitional color from the reddish purple into that kind of elephant gray texture. As you can see, we started adding in some of this like plum purpley color to create that kind of like, you know, gum effect above the teeth. And then I'm just kind of bringing that color all through like the area, I guess what would be considered kind of a lip. And I'm just gonna bring that all the way through just behind the teeth, just for the effect of creating a difference in color and contrast just around the teeth there, just making it look more mouth-like. So I got all the scaly texture in the upper face, upper jaw area. Then we're gonna come in and color those eyes. We're gonna do like nice dark reds and stuff in there. And then we're gonna have a nice light source coming from this side at the end to kind of, you know, create that little glow effect. We'll bring that lighting all the way down through the piece. So as we go along here, we're just kind of building it up layer by layer. You want to figure out where your light source is coming from. That way you know where to put your little shiny highlight, right? So if your light source is coming from here, then that's where your shadow is going to be, from underneath the top of the eyelid or the eyebrow. It's casting the shadow down onto the eye. And then as it gets further away from the light source, it starts to lighten up again, because that light is passing through the eye into the back of the eye, and then it's lighting up the iris. So you want to have a little highlight opposite where the outer highlight is, or where the, you know, you're eventually going to put your white to make it look all wet and shiny. And you want your darker areas near the top of the eye. We're just adding some little flecks, some little textures in the eyeball, giving it more of a realistic look. Now that we got everything kind of laid in there, we can go in and really define some of the edges, some of the shapes of the outer lids. What I love about a piece like this is that it tends to evolve as you go. So, you know, the initial drawing was, you know, a freehand marker sketch. So the vision you might have in your head when you start the piece can change over time. And then as you're going through it and making certain decisions as to what's going to look better in that area, you might improvise a little bit in terms of, what color palette to use or what textures you want in that area, what's going to work better to make it not look like a cover-up. Now that I got that kind of purpley red in there, I can go in with a little highlight and create these little areas. Areas that I'm hitting right now, I kind of like either lightly brushed over or left kind of open so that I can pack this kind of dirty white into these little areas, create that kind of like bumpy, kind of wet texture. I'm just kind of going in and hitting these areas, like I said, that I've left open or that are just really lightly brushed over, and I'm just kind of hitting the area with the tips of my little round shader here, sometimes making little circles if I want the highlight to be a little bit bigger and a little bit more solid, or if I just want like a little dot or just lightly tap the area. It just depends how strong you want that highlight to be. Then once you wipe and you see what's there, if you want a little bit more, you can just go in and so right now I am laying in this background that you can see kind of through the mouth and the teeth on the kind of backlit environment that this creature is living in. So we're going with like a kind of blue-green glowy background, and that's going to be our light source that's going to cast some lighting onto the creature itself. So I'm just brushing in, I believe it's tropical teal. I'm leaving open spaces where I know that there's going to be like some of the drippy saliva coming off the teeth. But right now my goal is to just kind of lay this color in. I mean, you always kind of want to stay on the ends of your needles. You don't want to overwork an area. Always better to go too light than to go too dark. You can always make it darker. You just kind of want to brush that color into that area, and all the way filled that area, you move on to a new spot, let it settle in. Then if you need to go back and maybe quickly brush a little bit more, you can do that. So when I'm laying color over area that's already been tattooed with like black or gray wash or something like that, I definitely want to use pigments that are more white based. You don't want to use a color that's too translucent. You want to use something that's kind of basically a white based ink, something that's either green or red or blue or purple, whatever color you're choosing. You want something that's a little bit more opaque. So I'm going in and adding a little bit more black behind these lower teeth here, because every piece can always use more black. What this is doing is creating a little bit more contrast, more separation, and more depth, so you can see the difference between the teeth and the front jaw, and then the tongue inside the mouth. This is really just kind of also getting rid of the last little remnants of the old tattoo in this section, in this area. This will make the teeth stick out a little bit more. And then when I layer some more light color over the teeth with this nice rich black behind them, they'll just stand out that much more. Some of the old tattoo from the old gator, that was like its lower jaw in there. You see some of that texture in there, and I like packed a little bit of white, just kind of brushed a little bit of white in all of these teeth just to put like that base layer. Now I'm going to go in and use another white based color to blend that out even further, you know, and gradually over time you can smooth that out to there where it doesn't really look like a cover up. You know, you can hide it in the texture of the tooth. What I'm doing here is creating the kind of atmospheric teeth, right? So the teeth towards the back side of the jaw that you're seeing on the other side. So you're basically getting the shadow of the tooth on the other side. So I'm just basically taking the darker version of this color that I have throughout the atmosphere, this kind of teal color, and just creating these shadows of teeth basically. And that creates the illusion of depth. You get to see the teeth in the front that are high contrast, high detail, and then the ones that are more atmospheric and kind of fuzzy just faded off in the back. All right, so now I'm going through and smoothing out the teeth, putting in this kind of cool gray and just smoothing out the overall texture. Taking a little curve mag and just brushing this cool gray in there, still leaving open skin for like the highest highlight. But some of this area is covering some of the old tattoos, so creating these gray kind of, you know, the shadow, the kind of curving of the tooth around towards the inner part of the mouth. So that part of the tooth is going to be a little bit darker. It's going to be a darker tone, a gray, you know, and that's going to help hide the old tattoo. And then I can pack my lighter highlight colors over these areas to really make them stand out. This way the tooth looks nice and three-dimensional, right? And it's got curve to it, right? All right, so really happy with where we are for the day. We managed to get a lot more texture laid in, managed to lay in some color. Really happy with the texture up in the upper part of the head, those gums, the teeth, everything's starting to kind of come together on the upper part of the arm. Now we're going to continue that lighting and some of those, you know, tones throughout the rest of the piece so that it all looks cohesive. But you can see that the old tattoo is pretty much gone. The alligator, the shark, everything's starting to just disappear into the new tattoo. So we're building all these textures. Everything's laid out really nicely and it's starting to really come together. So by adding the little layers of color and the highlights, you know, everything's really starting to like come together nicely. So I'm pretty happy with it.